Lucas Greystone stood at the window of his home office, gazing out at the meticulously manicured lawn. The setting sun cast long shadows across the perfectly trimmed grass, a testament to the order he'd worked so hard to achieve in his life at 38. Lucas had climbed the ladder of success, rung by rung, transforming himself from a boy of humble origins into one of Austin's most respected civil engineers. He turned back to his desk, which was covered in blueprints and schematics for the massive bridge project that had consumed his life for the past few months. The bridge would be his magnum opus, a testament to his skill and dedication. Lucas allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction before diving back into the work. The hours ticked by unnoticed until the sound of the front door closing, cutting him off from his concentration. He glanced at his watch. 10. It's 30 past. It's 10:30. Marissa was home later than usual again. Lucas made his way downstairs. His footsteps echoed in the big living room. He found Marissa in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge. "You're home late," he said, leaning against the door frame. Marissa jumped slightly, then turned to face him. She was 34, and she was still strikingly beautiful. Her realtor smile was firmly in place, but her eyes betrayed a hint of annoyance and guilt. "Hey," she said. Her voice was a little too casual. "Yeah, I had a last-minute showing, you know how it is." Lucas nodded, studying her face. There was a time when Marissa had looked at him with genuine admiration, even awe. Now he saw only a carefully constructed mask. "How's the project going?" Marissa asked, clearly eager to change the subject. "It's coming along," Lucas replied. "We're making good progress, but there's still a lot to do." Marissa's smile faltered for a moment. "It always is, isn't it?" she muttered, more to herself than to him. Lucas felt a familiar sense of frustration. He knew his long hours were taking a toll on their marriage, but couldn't she see how important this project was? It would cement his reputation and secure their future. He'd come too far and worked too hard to let anything derail him. Now he announced heading to bed. Marissa was brushing past him without meeting his eyes. "Don't stay up too late," he told her. He watched her go, a nagging sense of unease settling in his gut. Something was off, had been off for a while now, but he pushed the thought aside. He had work to do the next morning. Lucas was already at his desk when Marissa emerged, dressed in workout clothes, heading to the gym. He asked, not looking up from his papers. Marissa replied, grabbing her keys. "I have a session with my trainer." Lucas's head snapped up. "Since when do you have a trainer?" Marissa gave a shrug, avoiding his gaze. She said, "Since a couple of weeks ago I told you about it. Remember?" Lucas was certain she hadn't, but he let it slide. "Well, have a good workout," as the door closed behind her. Lucas found himself unable to focus on his work. The image of Marissa with some faceless trainer kept intruding on his thoughts. He shook his head, trying to clear it. He was being ridiculous. Marissa was allowed to have a life outside of their home, wasn't she? Well, the seed of doubt had been planted at the gym. Marissa's heart was racing as she approached the weight area. Ryder Kane was there as always, his sculpted body drawing admiring glances from other patrons. When he saw Marissa, his face lit up with a cocky grin. "There's my favorite client," he called out, loud enough for others to hear. "Ready to feel the burn," Marissa replied, feeling a flush creep up her neck. "Let's just get to work," Ryder said as they moved. As they worked out, Ryder's hands lingered a little too long during adjustments. His compliments became increasingly suggestive. "You're looking amazing," he murmured as she finished a set of squats. "Bet your husband doesn't appreciate what he's got at home." Marissa should have shut him down. She should have walked away. Instead, she found herself leaning into his words, craving the attention and validation she'd been missing. "Lucas is busy," she said, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. She said, sounding surprised by the bitterness in her voice. "He's always busy." Ryder's eyes gleamed with interest. "His loss," he said, moving closer. "What do you say we grab a drink after this? Let's celebrate all your hard work." Marissa hesitated, her wedding ring suddenly feeling heavy on her finger. But the thought of going back to an empty house and another night alone while Lucas worked sure made her say, "Why not?" Hours later, Marissa found herself at a high-end after the bar downtown. Nursing a cocktail and laughing at Ryder's jokes, he was everything Lucas wasn't. Carefree, attentive, full of stories about his wild adventures. "I still can't believe you're married to that stuffed shirt," Ryder said, leaning in close. A woman like you deserves excitement and passion. Marissa knew she should defend Lucas and get up and leave. But the alcohol had loosened her inhibitions, and Ryder's attention was intoxicating. Lucas used to be different. She found herself saying, "When we first met, he was so driven and ambitious. I admired that, but now he takes you for granted." Ryder finished his hand brushing against hers and left, leaving her all alone while he chases his next big project. Marissa nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "I feel so trapped sometimes," she whispered, "like I'm just a prop in his perfect life." Ryder's eyes darkened with desire. "You don't have to be," he said, his voice low and husky. "You're a free woman. Marissa, you could do whatever you want, whoever you want." In that moment, looking into Ryder's eyes, Marissa made a choice that would change everything back at home. Lucas sat in his office staring at his phone. The home security app showed Marissa arriving home much later than usual. He told himself it was nothing, that he was being paranoid, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Over the next few weeks, Lucas noticed subtle changes in Marissa. Was more distant, quick to anger, and spending more and more time away from home. He tried to tell himself it was just stress, and that things would improve once his project was finished. But deep down, he knew better. It was the little things that gave her away. The unfamiliar cologne lingering on her clothes, the way she guarded her phone, and the sudden. She seemed to be trying to impress someone. Lucas wasn't the jealous type, but he was a businessman who liked to have the facts. So, he started gathering evidence, slowly and methodically. He installed tracking software on their shared devices, set up cameras in their home, and even hired a private investigator. He followed Marissa when she said she was working late, but he kept his cool. He didn't let on that he had any suspicions. He was building a solid case. Lucas Greystone didn't act on emotion or impulse. He would act when he had irrefutable proof. The breaking point came on Friday evening. Marissa was getting ready to go out dressed in an outfit that was far too provocative for the casual work event she claimed to be attending. Lucas watched her from the doorway of their bedroom, his face an impassive mask. "You're going to that party tonight?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Marissa was startled and nearly dropped her lipstick. "Yeah," she replied. "It's just a work thing," she said, avoiding his gaze. Lucas stepped into the room, his presence suddenly filling the space. "I'm not blind," he said, his tone carrying a warning. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back and find things the same." Fear flashed across Marissa's face, but then her expression hardened. Defiance replacing guilt. "I'm a free woman, Lucas. You don't own me." The rooftop party. Marissa was trying to lose herself in the music and alcohol, pushing thoughts of Lucas's warning to the back of her mind. She was laughing with some colleagues when a familiar voice cut through the noise. Marissa felt a mixture of excitement and dread as Ryder approached. She knew she should keep her distance, especially in front of her work friends. But Ryder had never been subtle. "You look smoking hot tonight," he said loudly, his eyes roving over her body. "Bet your husband doesn't even notice, does he?" Marissa flushed, acutely aware. Ryder wasn't there, but she could feel the curious glances from her colleagues. Ryder was on a roll, emboldened by alcohol and his own arrogance. He laughed. "It's not like it's a secret. Half the gym probably knows by now." Marissa felt the blood drain from her face. This was spiraling out of control. She opened her mouth to protest, to try, and she tried to salvage the situation when a hush fell over the crowd. She turned, and her heart stopped. Lucas stood at the entrance to the rooftop, impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a mask of cold fury as he surveyed the scene. His eyes locked onto Marissa and Ryder. Ryder, oblivious to the danger, swaggered towards Lucas. "You got a problem, man?" he slurred, puffing out his chest. "I gave her a taste of my dick. Relax, dude." The silence that followed was deafening. Marissa wanted to scream, to run away from this nightmare, but she was frozen in place, watching the scene unfold like a horrific car crash in slow motion. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't need to. In one smooth move, Lucas grabbed Ryder by the throat and slammed him to his knees before anyone could react. Lucas's fist connected with Ryder's face, the crack of bone echoing across the rooftop. Ryder crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Lucas stood over him for a moment, his breathing steady, his face still a mask of controlled rage. Then, without a word, He turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As he left, Marissa stood there, feeling humiliated and terrified. She looked at her colleagues and friends, who were shocked, and realized that her life was over. As Lucas got into the elevator, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase was complete, and it was time to dismantle Marissa's world, piece by piece. Just as she had ended their life together, he had no room for forgiveness and no desire for reconciliation. Marissa had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. Lucas Greystone was not a man to be betrayed. He was not a man to show weakness or mercy as he stepped out into the night. Lucas's mind was already racing with the next steps of his plan, the bridge project, and his career. His reputation would survive and even thrive, but Marissa would learn the true cost of crossing him. Lucas drove home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He kept replaying the events of the party in his mind, each replay stoking the cold fury in his chest. He pulled into the driveway of their suburban Austin home and allowed himself a moment to breathe and center himself. He knew he couldn't afford to lose his cool, so he took a deep breath and got to work. He gathered Marissa's belongings, clothes, jewelry, and personal items, and piled them by the front door. As he worked, he called his lawyer, John. "It's Lucas. I need you to file those divorce papers we discussed." "Yes, now. And I want the accounts frozen just like we'd planned it out." Lucas listened to the response on the other end. "No, there's no need for a cooling off period. I've got all the evidence we need. Make it happen." He hung up and carried on with his task. By the time he heard a car pull into the driveway, a mountain of Marissa's possessions was ready by the door. He positioned himself in the foyer, arms crossed, waiting. The key turned in the lock and Marissa stumbled in. Marissa's face was tear-stained and her mascara was smudged. She froze when she saw Lucas, her eyes darting between him and the pile of her things. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about." Lucas cut her off. His voice was cold and level. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now you deal with the consequences." Marissa's face crumpled. "Please just let me explain. It didn't mean." Ryder was just trying to get out, but Lucas cut him off. He was angry and didn't give Ryder a chance to explain. He told Marissa to take her things and leave. She was crying. Lucas was angry. He said that she could go anywhere, but she'd lost the right to call it home when she slept with that gym rat. "You bastard," she hissed. "You think you can just throw me away like this? I have rights, you know. Call your lawyer. I'm sure they'd love to see the evidence I've gathered. The hotel receipts, the text messages, the video footage. Go ahead, Marissa. Fight me on this. See how that works out for you." The color drained from Marissa's face as the full weight of the situation sank in. Her situation sank in. "You've been spying on me, Lucas." You gave a shrug that showed you were unmoved by her shock. You said you prefer to think of it as protecting your interests. This was the last time you'd be saying that. Get out of my house with shaking hands. Marissa began gathering her belongings as she struggled with the bags. Lucas stood impassively, making no move to help. When she finally managed to get everything loaded into her car, she turned back to him. Marissa looked at him with pleading eyes. "Please, Lucas. We can work through this. We've been through so much together." But he didn't reply. He just closed the door in her face as she heard her car pull away. Her credit cards were declined when she tried to check into a hotel. Her cell phone was cut off when she went to the bank to withdraw cash. She was informed that all joint accounts had been frozen pending legal proceedings. Desperate and humiliated, she found herself staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, using the last of her cash reserves. It was there that she received the call from her lawyer. "Greystone, this is Alan Parker. I'm afraid I have some difficult news regarding your divorce proceedings." Marissa clutched the phone tighter. "What is it? What's happened?" The lawyer sighed. Crackled through the speaker. "Your husband has presented some rather compelling evidence of infidelity, texts, emails, video footage. I'm sorry to say, but it's quite damning. It's also an invasion of privacy," Marissa protested. "I'm sorry, but he can." Alan interrupted. "What's more, he's invoking the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement." Marissa felt the blood drain from her face. "What does that mean?" Alan said, "It means you're entitled to nothing, Mrs. Greystone. No alimony, no share of assets." I'm sorry, but legally speaking, you're walking away from this marriage with only what you. Marissa was brought into it when the phone slipped from her numb fingers as the full impact of Lucas's revenge hit her. She was ruined, cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of regret. Meanwhile, Lucas threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. The bridge project consumed his days and nights, providing a welcome distraction from the emptiness of the house. He ignored the concerned looks from colleagues, the rumors that always get spread one evening as he was working on some calculations in his office. A knock at the door jolted him from his concentration. He looked up to see David, his project manager, hovering nervously in the doorway. "Come in," David Lucas said, gesturing to a chair. "What's on your mind?" David sat fidgeting uncomfortably. "We're all a bit worried about you," Lucas said. "You've been working non-stop." "Stop. After what happened with Marissa, my personal life is none of your concern." Lucas cut him off sharply. "The project is on schedule, isn't it?" "Well, yes, but then there's no problem," Lucas said with finality. "Was there anything else?" David hesitated, then shook his head no. "That's all. Just take care of yourself, okay?" As David left, Lucas turned back to his work, pushing down the flicker of emotion that threatened to surface. He didn't need anyone's concern or pity. He had his work as success. That was all that mattered. He'd settled into a new routine: work, home, sleep, repeat. He ignored the occasional text or email from Marissa, each one more desperate than the last. He deleted her voicemails without listening to them. As far as he was concerned, she no longer existed. It was a Saturday afternoon when the confrontation he'd been avoiding finally happened. Lucas was in the backyard, methodically trimming the hedges, when he heard the gate open. He turned to see Marissa standing there. She was a shadow of her former self. Her designer clothes had been replaced by worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her shirt was untucked, and her hair was a mess. "You can't be here," Lucas said, his voice firm. "There's a restraining order in place." Marissa took a step forward, her eyes pleading. "Please, Lucas, just hear me out. What you're doing is cruel. I made a mistake, I know that, but it was just a mistake." Lucas scoffed. "Is that what you call it? You called another man for months, lying to my face day after day." "I was lonely," Marissa cried. "You were always working, always focused on your career. I needed something, someone, and instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work things out, you chose to betray everything we built together, Lucas." His tone was cold and distant. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now live with it." Tears streamed down Marissa's face. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You've taken everything from me." A momentary flicker of pity and regret crossed Lucas's face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He replaced it with a mask of cold indifference. "That's not my problem anymore," he said. "You should leave before I call the police." As Marissa turned to go, defeated, Lucas called after her. "Oh, and Marissa, I'd start looking for a job if I were you. I hear the diner on 5th is hiring waitresses." Marissa's face showed the pain she was feeling as she left, and it gave Lucas a grim sense of satisfaction. She had torn his world apart, and now she was experiencing the same pain and the same loss. Later that evening, as Lucas sat in his empty living room nursing a glass of whiskey, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from her. It was an unknown number, but he knew immediately who it was from. It was Lucas's writer. They needed to talk. This had gone too far. "Call me." Lucas stared at the message, a humorless smile playing at his lips. So the great writer Can had finally gathered the courage to reach out. Too little, too late. He typed out a response. "There's nothing to talk about. Enjoy the consequences of your actions." Blocking the number, Lucas tossed his phone aside and took another sip of whiskey. Let Ryder stew in his own mess. Let him feel the weight of his choices crushing down on him, just as Marissa was, as the days turned into weeks. I watched from a distance as the truth about Marissa and Ryder's affair started to emerge. Ryder's JY business began to suffer as word spread among clients, especially women, who started to avoid him. His once confident demeanor gave way to desperation as he tried to salvage his reputation. Marissa, who lost her realtor license due to the scandal, was forced to take a job waiting tables at a run-down diner. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to reach out to her. Well, they turned their backs on her, refusing to help their daughter through the scandal. Lucas stayed focused on his work, putting all his energy into the final stages of the bridge project. Lucas was focused and determined. His colleagues learned not to mention Marissa or anything related to his personal life to them. Lucas Greystone had become a machine, all cold efficiency and unwavering focus. It was a crisp autumn morning when Lucas stood at the base of the completed bridge, surrounded by city officials and members of the press. He cut the ribbon to officially open the structure to the public. He allowed himself a moment of genuine pride. This was his legacy. His mark on the world. A reporter pushed forward with a microphone, asking Mr. Greystone how it felt to see the project completed. Lucas paused, considering his words carefully. "It feels right," he said finally. "This bridge represents years of hard work, dedication, and unwavering commitment. It's proof that with the right focus and determination, you can overcome any obstacle." The crowd applauded. Lucas looked around, but he couldn't see Marissa anywhere. He thought he caught a glimpse of her at the back, watching with a mixture of longing and regret. But when he looked again, she was gone. Later that evening, Lucas was in his office, looking over the press coverage of the bridge opening. He got an unexpected visitor, David, his project manager. David knocked on the open door and came in. David sat down, looking a bit uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say congratulations on the bridge. It's a hell of an achievement." "Thank you," Lucas replied, sensing there was more to come. David took a deep breath. "Look, I know it's not my place, but are you okay?" "Lucas, really okay?" Lucas considered brushing off the question with his usual cold deficiency. But something in David's genuine concern gave him pause. "I'm managing." David nodded. "I get that, but there's more to life than work." He paused. "You know what happened with Marissa was awful, no question, but holding on to that anger and need for revenge? It's not healthy." Lucas felt a flare of irritation. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my personal life." David held up his hands. "I'm probably overstepping, but someone had to say it. You've become different." Lucas told her, "I'm worried. About you, that's all." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I appreciate your concern, David, but I'm fine. What happened with Marissa is over. I've moved on." David looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. He stood, nodding. "Just remember you've got people who care about you, okay? Don't shut everyone out." As David left, Lucas turned to stare out the window. His reflection was ghostly. The darkened glass had grown colder, perhaps, but he had survived, he had thrived, and he had done it all without compromising who he was or what he believed in. That was all that mattered. Lucas stood at the window of his office watching the sun set over the Austin skyline, the completed bridge stretching out before him, a testament to his skill and determination. As darkness fell, the bridge's lights flickered to life, a beacon of progress. He was just about to take in the final reports on the bridge project when he heard a knock at the door. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. David entered, a stack of papers in his hand. "Everything's in order," he said. "We're officially done." Lucas nodded and finally turned to face his project manager. "Good work, David. You and the team should be proud." David hesitated, then spoke again. "Listen, Lucas. There's something else I overheard some of the guys talking about. Apparently, your ex." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Marissa, what does she want?" David shrugged uncomfortably. He wasn't sure, but he'd heard she was in a bad way. She'd lost her job at the diner and couldn't make rent. Some people were saying she'd been sleeping in her car. His eyes betrayed a hint of emotion, but he quickly suppressed it. "That's not my concern," he said flatly. "Marissa made her choices, and now she's living with the consequences." David looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. "Right, I'll leave these reports with you. Have a good night, Lucas," he said, as the door closed behind him. Lucas turned back to the window, trying to focus on the bridge on his triumph, but Marissa's face kept intruding on his thoughts. He was frustrated. He grabbed his keys and headed out into the quiet streets of Austin, driving without a particular destination in mind. He ended up in Marissa's old neighborhood, cruising past her favorite coffee shop. He saw Marissa sitting huddled at an outside table, nursing a cup of coffee. Even from a distance, he could see how much she had changed. Her clothes were worn and ill-fitting. Her hair was limp and unkempt, and she looked broken. Before he could think better of it, Lucas pulled over and got out of the car. Marissa looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in shock and fear. "Lucas," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Marissa, you threw away everything we had built together." Tears welled up in Marissa's eyes. She whispered, "God, Lucas. I know. I prayed for it every day since. Isn't that enough? Haven't I suffered enough for a moment?" Lucas felt a flicker of pity, but he squashed it ruthlessly. "You made your bed, Marissa, and now you're lying in it." Marissa's face crumpled. "Please, Lucas, I have nothing left. No job, no home, no family. They all turned their backs on me. I don't know what to do anymore." Lucas stood silently, his face an impassive mask. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "That's not my problem." His voice was cold. "That's not my problem, Marissa. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to cheat." He turned to leave. Marissa called out desperately, "What about Ryder? Did you destroy his life too?" Lucas paused, a humorless smile playing at his lips. "Ryder destroyed his own life last I heard. His gym is going under." He drove home, trying to convince himself that the encounter didn't affect him, but he had this feeling that maybe he'd gone too far with the revenge thing. The next morning, he was back at work, getting stuck into new projects to try to bury any doubts he had. He was in the middle of a conference call when Lucas's assistant buzzed through with an urgent message. "Mr. Sis here to see you, Mr. Greystone. It's urgent." Lucas felt a surge of anger. Ryder Kane had the nerve to show up at his office, tell him to leave, and then storm out before he could call security. Ryder burst into the room, looking like a shadow of his former self, unshaven, disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes. "You bastard," he snarled. "You've ruined everything. My business, my reputation. It's all gone because of you, Lucas." He stood slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "I didn't ruin anything, Ryder. You did that all on your own when you decided to sleep with my wife." Ryder lunged forward, grabbing Lucas by the shirt. "That's not how it was," he said. "Marissa came on to me. She was lonely and neglected. I was just in one." In a swift move, Lucas broke Ryder's grip and shoved him back. "That's not being a good friend," he said. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Ryder, you're giving up. What do you want from me? An apology? I'm sorry. I screwed up. This scorched earth campaign of yours is too much." Lucas's laugh was cold and bitter. "You've destroyed my marriage, betrayed my trust, and now you have the nerve to say my response is too much." "It was a mistake," Ryder shouted. "People make mistakes. Lucas, they deserve second chances." Lucas said nothing, just stared at Ryder with contempt. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and menacing. He didn't get a second chance. Ryder slunk away, defeated. Lucas sank back into his chair, feeling triumphant. He should have felt triumphant, seeing his wife's lover brought so low. Instead, he just felt empty. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and sleepless nights. Lucas threw himself into new projects with a fervor that bordered on obsession. His colleagues whispered about him. David's demeanor had changed. He seemed colder than before. It was late one evening when he appeared at Lucas's office door. "Lucas, can we talk? Lucas, you've got to make a choice here." David held up his hands placatingly. I know, but someone has to say it. You've changed, Lucas, ever since what happened with Marissa." "Don't say her name," Lucas growled. "Ever since the divorce," David continued, undeterred. "You've been different. Colder, more ruthless. It's like you've lost a part of yourself." Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I haven't lost anything, David. I've simply realized what's important in life. Success, achievement, things that can't betray you or let you down." David shook his head sadly. "Is that really all that matters to you now? What about friendship, love, forgiveness?" Lucas scoffed. "Forgiveness is for the weak. It's a luxury I can't afford," David pressed, or too afraid to risk for a moment. Lucas's mask slipped, revealing a flash of pain beneath the cold exterior, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I think you," David said, his voice dangerously quiet. He was at the door and turning back one last time. He said, "Think about what I said, Lucas. It's not too late to choose a different path." Lucas was alone in his office. He tried to focus on work, But David's words kept echoing in his mind. Was he really so changed? Had his pursuit of revenge cost him more than he realized? Days passed, and Lucas found himself increasingly distracted. He caught himself staring at old photos of Marissa. He wondered where she was and how she was coping. He even thought about reaching out to her, but pride and anger stopped him. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when fate intervened. Lucas was driving home from the office when he spotted a familiar figure huddled under a bus stop shelter. He pulled over without thinking. Marissa looked up as he approached. She was soaked to the bone, shivering in the cold. "Get in the car, Marissa," Lucas said, sounding gruff. Marissa hesitated. "Why are you being like this?" Lucas sighed. "Just get in, Marissa. You'll catch your death out here." Reluctantly, Marissa climbed into the passenger seat. The drive to Lucas's house was silent. Tension was thick in the air. Once inside, Lucas handed Marissa a towel and some dry clothes. He also gave her some old things, which he had never gotten around to donating, as she changed in the bathroom. He paced. Lucas was in the living room, wondering what on earth he was doing when Marissa emerged. She looked small and vulnerable in her old sweater. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked quietly. "You ruined my marriage for a fling with that gym rat." "I know," Marissa cried, tears streaming down her face. "God, Lucas, I know I've regretted it every day since, but what you did, the way you destroyed my life, my career, was it really necessary?" Lucas turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "You hurt me, Marissa, more than I thought possible. I wanted you to feel that same pain." "Well, congratulations, Marissa," said softly. "You succeeded. I've lost everything, my job, my family, my self-respect. Respect. Are you happy now?" The question hung in the air between them. Lucas wanted to say yes, to feel the satisfaction he had been chasing for months, but as he looked at Marissa, really looked at her, he felt only a deep aching sadness. "No," he whispered. "No, I'm not happy." The admission seemed to break something in both of them, sank onto the couch sobbing while Lucas stood frozen, unsure what to do. Finally, he sat down beside her, careful to maintain some distance. "I'm sorry, Marissa," he said haltingly. "Not for exposing your affair or filing for divorce. You deserve that. But maybe I went too far." Marissa looked up, hope flickering in her tear. Marissa's eyes were filled with tears. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. His voice was firm but not unkind. "No, Marissa, I can't forgive you. What you did broke something between us that can't be fixed. But maybe we can both try to move on and let go of this anger and bitterness before it consumes us completely." Marissa nodded slowly. "I'd like that," she whispered. Marissa finally left, and Lucas felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He hadn't forgiven her, but he had taken the first step towards healing. The next day, he called his lawyer and said, "I want to revise the divorce settlement. I'd like to set up a modest alimony payment for Marissa. Enough to get her back on her feet, nothing more." His lawyer asked, "Are you sure?" Lucas replied, "I'm sure." It was about moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Lucas slowly began to reconnect with the world around him. He joined his team for after-work drinks, started mentoring young engineers, and even considered dating again. The pain of Marissa's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it no longer dominated his every waking moment. One evening, as Lucas stood on the bridge he had built, watching the sun set over Austin, he felt a sense of peace. He felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had survived the storm of betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. He hadn't forgiven, and he would never forget, but he had found a way to move forward without letting bitterness consume him. As the lights of the bridge flickered to life around him, Lucas allowed himself a small smile. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities. This time he would face it on his own terms, wiser, stronger, and free from the shackles of the past.